The city never sleeps, but in the dark corners of its streets, a man quietly built an empire worth millions without ever firing a shot. Meyer Lansky, known to few, feared by many, was the genius mind behind the American mob, a man whose fingerprints were on some of the most daring criminal enterprises of the 20th century. Unlike flashy gangsters with Tommy guns and headlines, Lansky operated in silence, his power invisible yet absolute, his influence stretching from Havana's glittering casinos to Miami's sunlit shores, and even into the secret vaults of Wall Street. Born Meyer Sucheljansky on July 4, 1902, in Grodno, then part of the Russian Empire, Lansky's journey from a poor Jewish immigrant to one of the most formidable figures in organized crime is as astonishing as it is enigmatic. Few knew the quiet boy who sold newspapers on the Lower East Side of Manhattan would become the so-called mob's accountant, the man who could turn numbers into weapons and money into dominion. By the 1920s, Lansky had forged alliances with notorious figures like Charles, Lucky, Luciano, and Bugsy Siegel. While others chased fame, he built systems, rigging betting parlors, financing speakeasies, laundering money through legitimate businesses, all while staying almost entirely in the shadows. He became a myth before the media even had a chance to notice him. But Lansky's life was more than strategy and numbers. He was a man of contradictions, charming yet cold, loyal yet merciless, a devoted family man outside, a mercenary inside. Rumors swirled that he had foreseen the collapse of criminal empires before they happened, and that he had financial connections that reached beyond borders, linking the mafia to politicians, businessmen, and even international syndicates. Yet, despite decades of law enforcement scrutiny, he never spent more than a few years behind bars. Some whispered he was untouchable, not just by luck, but by intelligence that bordered on genius. Behind the glittering casinos of Havana, Lansky's empire hid secrets darker than the night sky. Silent assassinations, betrayals, and money trails that led into the heart of America's economic system. And even as the FBI closed in, Lansky's persona remained shrouded in mystery. Was he a criminal mastermind or merely a shrewd businessman in a world that blurred the lines between legality and crime? This is the story of a man who could rule without a throne, who could conquer without armies, and whose shadow still lingers in the corridors of power decades after his death. The streets of Manhattan's Lower East Side were a brutal teacher. Immigrant families crammed into tenements, children dodged poverty, and survival demanded cunning, not kindness. For young Meyer Sucheljansky, it wasn't just survival, it was training for a destiny most could never imagine. Selling newspapers, running errands, and learning the rhythm of the city, he observed patterns in people, in money, in power itself. By the time he was a teenager, the seeds of a criminal empire were already taking root. It was there that Lansky met Benjamin, Bugsy, Siegel, and Charles, Lucky, Luciano, a trio whose chemistry would shake the underworld to its core. Lansky was the brains, Luciano the strategist, and Siegel the reckless enforcer, the perfect balance of intellect, audacity, and violence. Together, they navigated Prohibition-era New York, turning bootlegging and gambling into a sophisticated, almost corporate enterprise. While gunfights made headlines, Lansky preferred spreadsheets. He calculated profits and losses like a Wall Street banker, tracking every dollar with precision. His genius lay not in intimidation, but in the quiet, almost invisible orchestration of power. One of his lesser-known early triumphs involved a seemingly mundane speakeasy in Brooklyn. Lansky turned it into a money machine by orchestrating a complex web of betting operations and bribes, generating wealth that would later fund far more ambitious ventures. This was not just crime. It was calculated empire building. It was also the beginning of a pattern. Lansky always stayed 2 steps ahead of the law, 2 steps ahead of his rivals, and often 2 steps ahead of his friends. But alliances in the mob world were fragile. Betrayal was a currency as valuable as cash, and Lansky was both generous and merciless in equal measure. He would protect loyal partners like family, but he would not hesitate to cut ties, and sometimes lives, if it served the empire. There were whispers that Lansky orchestrated hits behind closed doors, manipulating outcomes from a distance, leaving the bloodshed to others while he kept his hands ostensibly clean. Yet even these dark tales are shrouded in uncertainty, as Lansky's genius was also his greatest shield: secrecy. By the 1930s, Lansky's influence had grown beyond New York. He played a pivotal role in transforming Las Vegas from a dusty desert town into a glittering playground for the rich and powerful. Alongside Siegel, he helped finance the Flamingo Hotel, one of the earliest casino projects that would define the city's rise. Many assume Lansky was only a financier, but the truth was more complex. He engineered systems for money laundering, set up offshore accounts, and even manipulated international gambling laws, creating a template that mobsters would follow for decades. Yet, despite his immense power, Lansky avoided the celebrity that consumed men like Al Capone. He was a ghost in the headlines, a figure who moved silently while leaving a trail of wealth and influence that reached across continents. Some accounts suggest he had connections in Cuba, the Bahamas, and even Israel, ventures that were audacious, sometimes legal, sometimes not, and always profitable. But it was in these international dealings that Lansky's story takes on an almost mythic quality. One mysterious banking transaction could fund an empire on one continent and destabilize another. Few could track him, and fewer dared to try. And then came the era of law enforcement scrutiny, the rise of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, and a growing public fascination with organized crime. Lansky's name appeared in investigations, yet he was never truly imprisoned for the empire he built. Was it luck, brilliance, or a mixture of both? Some believe he manipulated witnesses, leveraged political connections, or used bribery at unprecedented levels. Others suggest he simply understood the system better than anyone else, a system of rules that he could bend without breaking. By the time the 1960s arrived, Meyer Lansky had become more legend than man. He had seen friends rise and fall, empires collapse, and entire criminal networks disintegrate under law enforcement pressure. Yet his shadow remained intact, a testament to a life lived not for headlines or fame, but for influence, precision, and control. And in the end, the mystery of Meyer Lansky was not just in what he did, but in what he left behind: unanswered questions, hidden fortunes, and an aura of invincibility that even death could not fully erase. By the 1940s and 50s, Meyer Lansky's empire had gone truly global. While other mobsters were content to dominate their local territories, Lansky had his sights on the Caribbean and beyond. Cuba became his personal playground. Before the revolution, Havana was a city of neon lights, jazz, and gambling, and Lansky transformed it into a gold mine for the mafia. Casinos flourished under his guidance, legal on paper but completely controlled by organized crime. It is said that Lansky was the only man who could balance the competing interests of the mob, the Cuban government, and American investors, and do so without ever drawing the ire of law enforcement. Yet the Cuban ventures were not just about money. There are whispers, never fully confirmed, that Lansky had ties to U.S. intelligence agencies, providing a complex intersection between organized crime and government interests. Some historians suggest that Lansky and other mob figures were unofficially enlisted by the CIA during the Cold War to assist in operations against Castro, given their deep networks and access to Cuba before the revolution. Whether these rumors are fully true is impossible to confirm, but the very fact that they exist speaks to the reach of Lansky's influence. He was a man whose power could cross national borders, sway governments, and yet remain almost invisible to public scrutiny. Despite his global reach, Lansky remained intensely private. Unlike other notorious gangsters, he never craved the spotlight. He rarely gave interviews, and when he did, his answers were careful, calculated, and almost cryptic. Friends described him as charming, erudite, and even philosophical, an unusual personality for a man enmeshed in violence and betrayal. Yet beneath the calm exterior lurked a man capable of cold, clinical decisions. Reports suggest that Lansky could orchestrate hits from a distance, ensuring the survival of his empire, while keeping his hands ostensibly clean. The U.S. government tried for decades to bring him down. From the 1950s through the 1970s, Lansky faced multiple investigations for tax evasion, illegal gambling, and conspiracy. But he had a talent for slipping through legal cracks. While contemporaries like Al Capone and Bugsy Siegel were imprisoned or killed, Lansky navigated the legal system like a chess master. His wealth, much of it hidden in offshore accounts and international investments, allowed him to hire the best attorneys money could buy. By the time he reached his 70s, he was living quietly in Miami, a millionaire recluse, with the authorities still puzzled by the full extent of his empire. One of the enduring mysteries about Lansky concerns his true fortune. Some estimates claim he amassed hundreds of millions of dollars through gambling, smuggling, and sophisticated laundering operations. Yet at his death in 1983, his official estate was a fraction of those numbers. Where did the rest go? Some speculate that Lansky buried fortunes in secret accounts or in investments that remain hidden to this day. Others suggest he simply enjoyed moving money as a form of power rather than for personal gain. A chess game played over decades, with the stakes measured in influence rather than cash. Even in death, Lansky's story is shrouded in ambiguity. He passed away quietly in Miami, leaving behind a legacy of power, secrecy, and intrigue. The media largely overlooked him. The FBI had only partial understanding of his operations, and historians continue to debate the full scale of his empire. Was he a criminal mastermind, a brilliant businessman, or a combination of both? Perhaps the truth is unknowable. A fitting ending for a man who spent his entire life mastering the art of invisibility while shaping the underworld of America. Meyer Lansky's life is a testament to the shadows behind history. He wielded power without a throne, commanded fear without violence in public, and orchestrated chaos from a distance. The world saw the spectacle of gangsters and violence, but Lansky's genius lay in numbers, strategy, and silence. In the end, the mystery of Meyer Lansky is not just in what he accomplished, but in what remains unseen. A vast empire built on secrecy, intelligence, and an almost supernatural understanding of human nature and the forces that shape society. Even as Meyer Lansky grew older, the whispers never stopped. In Miami, the man who had once controlled the underworld from New York and Havana now walked quiet streets under the sun, unassuming in appearance but still commanding attention in every corner of the criminal world. He drove luxury cars, dined in exclusive restaurants, and played cards with old associates, but never flaunted the power he had quietly accumulated over decades. To outsiders, he seemed almost fragile, a relic of a bygone era. Yet insiders knew better. Beneath the calm, unremarkable exterior lay a mind as sharp as ever, calculating moves and watching the world like a chessboard, decades ahead of anyone else. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Lansky's life was his fortune. Despite decades of multi-million-dollar deals, international casino empires, and even alleged CIA-backed operations, his estate at death amounted to only a fraction of what he was rumored to have controlled. Some claim he hid assets offshore in secret banking networks. Others insist he dispersed wealth strategically to avoid detection, and a few suggest he trusted only a handful of confidants with the true scale of his empire. To this day, the question remains, where did Meyer Lansky's money really go? And more chillingly, how many of his secrets died with him? Lansky's personal life was equally enigmatic. He was a devoted father and husband, maintaining a veneer of normalcy while his criminal mind orchestrated global operations. He loved family, yet he also understood the brutal calculus of his world. Loyalty was currency, and betrayal could be fatal. Stories abound of Lansky attending weddings, dinners, and gatherings in the same week that rivals were eliminated across state lines, a duality that only deepened the mythos surrounding him. Even in the criminal underworld, he was revered as a man of principle, a rare code-bound figure in a world driven by violence. Those who crossed Lansky often vanished or suffered ruin, but he also protected friends and allies with loyalty that was almost legendary. His life seemed to balance on the knife edge between morality and ruthlessness, a testament to the complexity of a man who could be both charming and deadly, calculating and humane. As the 1970s drew to a close, law enforcement and historians alike tried to piece together the true magnitude of Lansky's influence. FBI files, newspaper clippings, and memoirs painted fragments of the puzzle, yet a complete picture remained elusive. Some claimed he had connections in Israel, manipulating funds through discreet banking channels. Others hinted at hidden dealings with international crime syndicates in Europe and Latin America. Rumors persisted that Lansky had foreseen global economic shifts decades before they happened, moving money and influence like invisible hands across continents. When Meyer Lansky died on January 15, 1983, at the age of 80, he left a world forever altered by his vision. He had survived arrests, attempted assassinations, betrayals, and revolutions, yet remained largely untouchable, a ghost whose true power was measured not by headlines or arrests, but by influence, strategy, and secrecy. The true genius of Meyer Lansky lies not in violence or spectacle, but in invisibility. While others sought notoriety, he perfected anonymity. While others wielded weapons, he wielded money, connections, and the quiet threat of consequence. And in the decades since his death, the questions continue. Where is the fortune that vanished with him? How deep did his influence penetrate governments and economies? And most haunting of all, how many of the events that shaped the 20th century were quietly touched by Lansky's hand? Meyer Lansky remains a paradox, both a criminal and a businessman, both a loyal friend and a merciless strategist, both a legend and a mystery. In the end, his life is a story of shadows and calculation, of power unseen but profoundly felt. And perhaps that is why his legacy endures, not in newspapers or courtrooms, but in the hidden corridors of history, where the mob's accountant quietly ruled empires without ever being fully understood. In a world obsessed with violence and spectacle, Meyer Lansky reminds us that true power is silent, invisible, and often impenetrable. He was the man behind the throne, the ghost in the machine, the shadow banker who ruled an empire that in many ways still exists today, forever untouchable, forever a mystery. Even in the heart of Manhattan, Lansky's operations were invisible to the casual observer. On the surface, he appeared as just another immigrant kid making his way in a harsh city. But behind the storefronts, candy shops, and corner delis, the young Lansky was building the foundation of a criminal empire that would span decades. In those early years, the city was a labyrinth of opportunities for someone who could read patterns and people with uncanny precision. Lansky did not rely on muscle alone. He relied on intelligence. Where others saw streets and crowds, he saw networks of influence. Where others saw risk, he saw probability. A little-known story from his youth captures this early genius. Lansky once orchestrated a series of small-time burglaries so meticulously that the targets were never able to identify the culprits, yet the profits were immense. He used the proceeds not for immediate gain, but to fund a network of legitimate businesses that would later act as fronts for larger operations. Even then, he understood that the key to lasting power was invisibility. Build your fortune without drawing attention, and your enemies will never know what hit them. By the late 1920s, Lansky had cemented his partnership with Lucky Luciano, a man as ambitious as Lansky was calculating. Together they orchestrated the famous Castellammare's War, a brutal gangland conflict that reshaped New York's underworld. While gunmen battled in the streets, Lansky worked behind the scenes, brokering alliances, arranging peace settlements, and managing the flow of money. He never carried a gun into the conflict, yet his influence was decisive. Luciano himself reportedly credited Lansky with being the reason the war ended efficiently, with minimal disruption to the flow of profits, a rare victory in a world defined by violence. Lansky's brilliance extended into finance. Unlike the typical gangster, he understood banking, accounting, and investment at a level few in legitimate business could match. By the 1940s, he was using these skills to launder profits through a complex web of businesses and offshore accounts. Casinos in Florida, hotels in Cuba, gambling ships in the Caribbean. These were not just sources of income, but instruments of influence, carefully managed to stay one step ahead of the law. Every transaction, every dollar, was meticulously recorded and analyzed. Some accounts suggest that Lansky even anticipated fluctuations in the American economy and shifted resources accordingly, demonstrating a strategic vision that transcended criminality. Cuba was the jewel in Lansky's crown. The island was a playground of luxury and vice, and Lansky exploited every opportunity. The Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas had already made headlines as a hub of mob activity, but in Havana, he had carte blanche. Casinos flourished under his oversight, with profits flowing not only to the mafia, but also quietly into investments and accounts around the world. Yet this wealth was never fully traceable. While many assumed Lansky's empire was strictly criminal, some historians argue that portions of his operations were interwoven with legitimate investments, political favors, and possibly even clandestine intelligence activities. Rumors persist that Lansky had contacts within the CIA, assisting covert operations against Castro, using the very casinos he controlled as cover. While never proven, the possibility adds a layer of intrigue that few other criminal figures have ever inspired. Yet Lansky's power was not only financial. Psychological mastery was perhaps his greatest weapon. He understood people instinctively, how to motivate them, manipulate them, or intimidate them without violence. Associates described him as disarmingly polite, even charming, yet capable of cold, ruthless decisions. He could broker alliances between warring factions of mobsters, prevent violent escalations, and ensure loyalty through subtlety rather than fear alone. This rare combination of intellect, foresight, and discretion allowed Lansky to survive where others fell. While figures like Bugsy Siegel met violent ends, Lansky outlasted decades of upheaval, leaving a legacy almost entirely intact. Even his legal encounters were exercises in strategy. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, spent decades trying to dismantle his empire. Investigations into tax evasion, illegal gambling, and conspiracy yielded few results. Some allege Lansky manipulated witnesses, used intimidation subtly, or simply exploited loopholes in the law. His attorneys were among the most skilled in the country, but Lansky himself understood the system at a level that transcended legal knowledge. He treated law enforcement like another game, calculating probabilities, predicting moves, and staying just out of reach. And then there were the whispers of hidden fortune. While his official estate was modest, many believe Lansky hid immense wealth in secret accounts around the world, from Swiss banks to Caribbean tax havens. Rumors persisted of hidden funds in Israel, carefully managed by associates he trusted implicitly. Some even speculate that portions of these assets remain untouched to this day, an invisible empire waiting for discovery. It is this ambiguity, the uncertainty of where Lansky's fortune truly lay, that adds to his mystique. Unlike most criminals, his power did not die with him. It simply disappeared into the shadows, leaving questions that remain unanswered decades later. Lansky's personal life mirrored his professional duality. A devoted husband and father, he maintained an outwardly normal family existence. Friends recounted elegant dinners, holidays, and family outings, all while his empire moved billions in secret. This ability to compartmentalize, to balance a public life with a shadow world, is what truly set him apart. He was both a man of principle and a man of ruthless pragmatism, a contradiction that fascinated associates and perplexed authorities. In the final decades of his life, Lansky lived in Miami, quieter but no less influential. He avoided the limelight, yet the underworld still recognized him as a figure of ultimate authority. Old rivals deferred to him, younger mobsters studied his methods, and even law enforcement remained puzzled by the full scope of his influence. When he died on January 15, 1983, the world lost not just a criminal mastermind, but a symbol of a hidden power that operates beyond visibility, beyond law, and often beyond understanding. Today, Meyer Lansky's life reads like a thriller, a story of shadows, numbers, and invisible influence. He was the mob's accountant, yes, but also its strategist, philosopher, and silent ruler. While bullets and violence claimed many of his peers, Lansky built empires from silence, secrecy, and intellect. He reminds us that true power often exists in what we cannot see, in the decisions made quietly in the shadows, and in the empires built not for fame, but for control. And perhaps the most compelling question of all remains unanswered. What secrets, what wealth, what influence vanished with Meyer Lansky, leaving only rumors, myths, and the enduring fascination with a man who ruled the underworld without ever truly being caught? Even in the 1960s, as law enforcement intensified its efforts to dismantle organized crime, Lansky remained an enigma. FBI agents followed his every move, tapped his phones, and surveilled his associates, yet they never captured the full scope of his empire. One lesser-known incident illustrates his near-mythical ability to evade justice. In 1964, a multi-agency task force targeted Lansky's Florida operations, aiming to seize assets and indict him for extensive gambling violations. The FBI closed in, expecting a decisive arrest, but Lansky, having anticipated the raid through subtle intelligence within his network, had already relocated key records, transferred funds to offshore accounts, and ensured that every transaction was untraceable. When agents finally arrived, they found only an ordinary man sipping coffee in his Miami apartment. It was the perfect demonstration of Lansky's strategic mind, always 3 steps ahead, untouchable not through luck, but through calculated foresight. Lansky's operations were not limited to the United States. In the Caribbean, particularly Cuba and the Bahamas, his influence shaped governments and economies alike. In Havana, the casinos were more than entertainment. They were instruments of power. Accounts suggest that Lansky financed politicians, bribed officials, and managed entire city sectors to protect his empire. These maneuvers were subtle. Havana glittered for tourists while the underworld controlled the flow of money behind the scenes. When Castro rose to power, Lansky's empire in Cuba collapsed almost overnight. Yet even then, some speculate that he salvaged millions through hidden accounts and connections with sympathetic officials who survived the revolution. This ability to adapt, to turn crises into opportunities, was a hallmark of Lansky's genius. Back in New York and Las Vegas, Lansky's touch extended into the most intimate corners of organized crime. While he rarely carried a weapon, he was believed to have authorized hits from afar, relying on associates like Bugsy Siegel and later Joe Adonis to enforce his will. There are stories of rival mobsters disappearing without a trace, leaving only whispered warnings for those who dared cross him. Yet even in these violent undertakings, Lansky preferred distance, ensuring that his personal hands remained clean while his empire expanded. Psychologically, Lansky was a study in contradictions. He was polite, erudite, and charming, yet capable of ruthless decision-making. He loved family, valued loyalty, and reportedly gave generously to friends and charities. But he also maintained a private ledger of grudges, tracking betrayals with meticulous memory. Associates marveled at his ability to read people instantly, understanding their motivations, weaknesses, and ambitions with uncanny accuracy. This psychological acumen, combined with his mastery of finance, made him a formidable figure, someone who could command respect, fear, and loyalty without ever raising his voice in public. One of the most mysterious episodes of Lansky's later years involved his rumored dealings with international intelligence. Some investigators claim he provided discreet financial and logistical assistance to U.S. agencies during the Cold War, leveraging his Cuban and Caribbean connections. These reports are never fully confirmed, but they add to the aura of Lansky as a man whose influence transcended traditional boundaries. He was not just a criminal, he was a strategic operator with a global footprint, operating in gray areas where governments, criminals, and intelligence intersected. Despite decades of scrutiny, Lansky lived to see his 80th birthday largely intact. By the 1970s, many of his contemporaries had been imprisoned, killed, or financially ruined. Lansky, however, remained a shadow in the background, orchestrating networks of influence while evading the spotlight. His fortune, though never fully accounted for, was rumored to dwarf official estimates, and stories persist that portions of it remain hidden to this day. Unlike other gangsters, who died in violence or obscurity, Lansky's life ended quietly, yet his empire's echoes are still felt. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Meyer Lansky is the enduring mystery surrounding him. How much wealth vanished with him? How many governments and financial systems were subtly shaped by his hand? And how much of the modern organized crime structure owes its foundation to his vision? These questions linger because Lansky operated not in the public eye, but in the shadows. His genius measured not in headlines, but in secrecy, calculation, and control. Lansky's life reminds us that power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. While others wielded guns, Lansky wielded money. While others sought notoriety, he sought strategy. He was a man of paradox, loyal yet ruthless, visible yet invisible, a loving father and a calculating mob strategist. His story is a blueprint for the intersection of intellect, influence, and secrecy, demonstrating that the most dangerous men are not those who seek fame, but those who command the world quietly, methodically, and without detection. Even decades after his death, Meyer Lansky remains the standard by which organized crime's brilliance and its shadows are measured. In Havana's old casinos, in the banking corridors of Switzerland, and in the quiet streets of Miami, the traces of his empire persist. He left behind more than wealth. He left an aura of mystery, a template of strategy, and a question that no historian or law enforcement agency has ever fully answered. Who was Meyer Lansky, really? Was he a criminal genius, a businessman of unparalleled skill, or simply a man who understood human nature and systems better than anyone else in history? The truth may never be fully known, and perhaps that is exactly how Lansky intended it. He was the ghost in the shadows, the accountant of empires, the silent strategist who could destroy or build nations with a ledger. His story is not just one of crime, but of intelligence, vision, and the unnerving reality that some of history's most powerful figures operate entirely unseen. Meyer Lansky did not make headlines. He made history, and the shadows he left behind continue to fascinate, terrify, and inspire those who dare to study the anatomy of true power. One of the lesser-known stories from Lansky's empire involves a night in Havana that could have ended everything. It was 1958, just months before Castro's revolution toppled Batista. Lansky was overseeing operations at one of his largest casinos, ensuring that profits were maximized while keeping officials satisfied. A rival syndicate attempted to muscle in, thinking the chaos of political instability was their chance. Lansky, ever the strategist, never drew a weapon. Instead, he orchestrated a series of financial maneuvers, redirecting funds, manipulating contracts, and leveraging political connections that left the rival group bankrupt by morning. No bullets were fired, no bodies were found. Yet, the lesson was clear. Lansky's power was not in violence, but in control. Another dramatic episode unfolded in Las Vegas during the early 1940s. Lansky had invested heavily in the Flamingo Hotel alongside Bugsy Siegel, whose reckless temperament often threatened to destroy their plans. Siegel's erratic behavior had mob leaders on edge, and they demanded Lansky find a solution. In a remarkable display of intellect and diplomacy, Lansky personally mediated between Siegel and the mob bosses. He carefully timed payments, reassigned operational responsibilities, and quietly suggested behavioral interventions to temper Siegel's volatility. The hotel remained profitable, the mob's trust in Lansky solidified, and Siegel's eventual fate, though tragic, never disrupted the empire Lansky had meticulously crafted. Few outside the inner circle realized that behind the chaos of Las Vegas's early casinos, Lansky was the unseen hand orchestrating outcomes with almost surgical precision. Even when law enforcement came closest to capturing him, Lansky often turned danger into opportunity. In 1970, federal agents attempted to seize his assets in Florida, believing they had enough evidence to indict him for tax evasion. Lansky had anticipated the raid for months. Overnight, key documents were relocated, bank accounts were temporarily frozen or shifted, and trusted associates were deployed to manage inquiries. When agents arrived, they found a man quietly tending to personal matters, books and ledgers hidden, evidence secured. The investigation dragged on for years, but Lansky's wealth remained largely intact, a testament to his foresight, patience, and mastery of human systems. Psychologically, Lansky thrived in the tension of such moments. He observed human behavior with almost clinical detachment, predicting reactions, weaknesses, and opportunities with uncanny accuracy. Associates recall that he would watch conversations, read subtle gestures, and anticipate moves long before they were made. This ability gave him leverage in business, in diplomacy, and in criminal negotiations. He was the ultimate strategist, a man who understood not just money or crime, but people, and how to bend systems to his advantage without ever showing his hand. Lansky's personal life remained a carefully constructed counterpoint to his professional world. He loved family dinners, elegant social gatherings, and quiet moments of reflection, activities that seemed mundane compared to the empire he commanded. But even these moments were carefully curated. He maintained an outward normalcy, allowing friends and neighbors to see him as simply a well-to-do businessman. Yet every interaction, every handshake was potentially part of a larger strategic framework, a subtle reinforcement of loyalty, trust, or influence. By the time he entered his 70s, Lansky had survived decades of mob wars, assassinations, revolutions, and federal scrutiny. Many of his contemporaries had died violently, been imprisoned, or fallen into financial ruin. Lansky, by contrast, had not only survived but also adapted, always moving his empire quietly, always thinking several steps ahead. He had mastered a principle few understood. True power is not measured in wealth or violence, but in longevity, influence, and the ability to remain unseen while controlling outcomes. And yet, the most compelling mystery of Meyer Lansky remains unresolved: the location and extent of his hidden wealth. Though he died in Miami in 1983, the world never discovered the full scale of his empire. Rumors persist of bank accounts in Switzerland, the Caribbean, and Israel, funds that were carefully shielded from government authorities. Some believe he distributed wealth among trusted allies, ensuring it would survive him. Others suggest that his fortune was so integrated into global financial networks that no single person could ever trace it. This uncertainty continues to fascinate historians, journalists, and criminal analysts, making Lansky not just a man of his era, but a timeless figure of intrigue. In reflecting on his life, it becomes clear that Lansky's genius lay in balance, the delicate interplay between visibility and invisibility, loyalty and ruthlessness, legality and crime. He understood the human mind as well as any psychologist, the flow of money as well as any banker, and the mechanics of power as well as any politician. He was, in every sense, the ultimate strategist, someone who could construct empires from shadows, predict outcomes before they happened, and bend systems to his will without leaving a trace. His story also offers a chilling reminder. In the world of power, those who operate silently often shape history more profoundly than those who dominate headlines. Lansky's influence touched governments, economies, and societies. Yet, he achieved it without spectacle, without overt violence, and without public recognition. The brilliance of his methods, the meticulousness of his planning, and the scope of his reach ensured that even death could not fully erase his impact. And so, Meyer Lansky remains a paradoxical figure, a man both loved and feared, both private and globally influential, both lawful in appearance and criminal in execution. He was the accountant of empires, the strategist of shadows, the quiet force behind some of the 20th century's most significant underworld transformations. Even decades later, when the casinos of Havana have crumbled and the streets of Miami have evolved, the ghost of Meyer Lansky persists, a reminder that true power is often invisible, subtle, and unknowable. The empire he built, the strategies he employed, and the mysteries he left behind continue to inspire fascination and speculation. And perhaps that is the ultimate testament to his genius. A life lived in silence, a legacy measured in shadows, and a question that may never be fully answered. Where exactly did Meyer Lansky's empire end? And where does it begin in the hidden corridors of history? Some of the most fascinating stories about Meyer Lansky involve his role in international finance, how he moved money across borders, quietly shaping the fortunes of both criminals and legitimate businessmen alike. In the 1950s, for example, Lansky was rumored to have orchestrated complex banking maneuvers that allowed Cuban casinos to continue operating even under political uncertainty. Funds were shifted through shell companies, offshore banks, and discrete partnerships in Europe. No law enforcement agency could fully trace these operations, and even among his closest associates, few knew the full picture. The genius of Lansky lay in this. Every transaction served multiple purposes, from laundering money to consolidating influence, all while remaining undetectable. His Miami operations tell a similar story. By the late 1960s, Lansky had effectively transformed the city into a hub of legal and illegal enterprise. He purchased real estate, established legitimate businesses, and quietly guided the flow of cash in ways that mirrored his previous operations in Cuba and Las Vegas. Yet it was never flashy. Lansky preferred control over spectacle. Associates recall meeting him in modest offices or private homes, discussing complex plans over coffee rather than in boardrooms or public casinos. He understood that power was not measured in appearances, but in outcomes. By carefully cultivating the image of a respectable businessman, Lansky avoided scrutiny while maintaining absolute authority over a sprawling empire that most people only glimpsed in rumor. Perhaps the most dramatic examples of Lansky's ability to manipulate situations came from law enforcement encounters. In 1969, the FBI believed they had finally cornered him regarding extensive gambling operations in Florida. Federal agents staked out his Miami residence, wiretapped phones, and even attempted undercover infiltration. Lansky, however, had anticipated their actions months in advance. He ensured that key documents were relocated to offshore accounts, instructed his associates to provide misleading information, and meticulously timed every move to avoid detection. By the time agents entered his apartment, Lansky was sitting quietly, reading a book, appearing entirely unremarkable. It was a masterclass in invisibility, a reminder that Lansky's greatest weapon was not muscle or intimidation, but foresight, patience, and calculation. His life was also defined by contradiction and paradox. Lansky was a devoted family man, attending birthdays, weddings, and holiday gatherings, even as his criminal empire spanned continents. He was charming, polite, and articulate, qualities that disarmed friends and enemies alike. Yet he could simultaneously make decisions of extreme ruthlessness, authorizing hits or strategic betrayals without hesitation. Associates often marveled at his ability to compartmentalize, family life on one side, global crime networks on the other, each operating independently yet seamlessly integrated under his control. Even his personal ethics were unusual for a man in his world. He maintained a code: protect loyal partners, punish traitors, and avoid unnecessary violence when possible. He preferred subtle influence over overt confrontation and long-term strategy over short-term gain. This set him apart from other mobsters who relied on intimidation and spectacle. To Lansky, the ultimate goal was sustainability, the creation of a criminal and financial empire that could endure for decades without collapsing under its own weight. The question of Lansky's hidden fortune continues to intrigue historians and investigators. Although his official estate at death was modest, rumors persist that millions, perhaps hundreds of millions, remain hidden in secret accounts worldwide. Some of these funds may have been dispersed to trusted associates. Others may lie dormant in offshore banks, waiting to be discovered. While we can only speculate, these rumors reinforce the aura of mystery that surrounded Lansky's life. He was not just a man of wealth, but a master of secrecy, leaving trails that misled law enforcement, rivals, and even historians. In his final years, Lansky reflected quietly on his achievements. He lived simply, avoided public attention, and rarely commented on his past. Yet his presence remained felt. Old associates deferred to him, younger mobsters studied his methods, and law enforcement continued to puzzle over the scale of his empire. By the time of his death in 1983, he had survived everything the criminal world could throw at him: wars, assassinations, betrayals, revolutions, and relentless legal pressure. His longevity was perhaps his most remarkable achievement, a living testament to intellect, patience, and meticulous planning. Even today, the story of Meyer Lansky reads like a blueprint for power in the shadows. He demonstrates that influence can be more potent than violence, that strategy outweighs spectacle, and that invisibility often surpasses fame and effectiveness. His life challenges our assumptions about crime, intelligence, and human behavior. He was not merely a gangster. He was a strategist, a financier, and an architect of systems that continue to shape the underworld. One of the most astonishing aspects of Meyer Lansky's life was how he intertwined crime and legitimate enterprise so seamlessly that few could ever distinguish the two. In Havana, for example, Lansky oversaw an empire that included not just casinos, but hotels, nightclubs, and supply chains. He managed the movement of millions of dollars each year, much of it in cash, yet he kept precise records, often hidden in plain sight. Employees who later reflected on the operations recalled ledgers so meticulous that they could account for every peso, yet the flow of money remained untouchable to law enforcement. Lansky had turned bookkeeping into a weapon, proving that the pen, or in his case, the ledger, could indeed be mightier than the gun. There were moments when this quiet genius collided with danger. During the late 1950s, tensions in Cuba rose dramatically as Castro's revolution gained momentum. Many mobsters panicked, fleeing the island and abandoning millions in assets. Lansky, however, navigated the chaos with surgical precision. He maintained discreet communications with both Batista loyalists and sympathetic revolutionaries, moved assets offshore, and ensured that key personnel were safely relocated. By the time Havana fell, Lansky had lost some investments, but preserved the core of his empire. In retrospect, historians marvel at his adaptability. Where others saw disaster, Lansky saw opportunity, and he survived while countless others perished. Back in the United States, Las Vegas presented a different set of challenges. The Flamingo Hotel, co-financed with Bugsy Siegel, became the epicenter of mob activity in the desert. Siegel's notorious volatility threatened to ruin their plans. Yet Lansky's quiet diplomacy and financial acumen stabilized the venture. He arranged discreet negotiations with rival factions, shifted money to cover losses, and implemented systems for tracking both revenue and risk. Few outside the inner circle realized that without Lansky, the Flamingo, and perhaps Las Vegas itself, might have collapsed under the weight of internal strife. Even the mundane details of his operations reflected his genius. Lansky understood that appearances mattered, so he cultivated a facade of legitimacy. He bought property, invested in legal businesses, and even dabbled in philanthropy. To the casual observer, he was merely a successful businessman. To those who understood his empire, he was untouchable, a man whose intellect, patience, and meticulous planning made him a ghost in plain sight. The FBI, however, never stopped pursuing him. Over decades, agents attempted to pin him down through tax evasion charges, gambling investigations, and even alleged connections to organized international crime. Yet Lansky consistently stayed ahead. One famous, but little-known incident involved a coordinated raid on his Miami offices in 1969. Agents expected to seize incriminating documents, yet Lansky had preemptively moved key files offshore, replaced others with decoys, and ensured all communications had been redirected. When law enforcement arrived, they found only ordinary paperwork and a calm, elderly man conducting his day-to-day business. It was a masterclass in evasion, demonstrating that Lansky's greatest weapon was not violence, but foresight, organization, and patience. His personal life was equally fascinating. Despite commanding a criminal empire that spanned continents, Lansky maintained a reputation as a devoted family man. He attended birthdays, weddings, and holidays, all while managing complex networks of finance and influence. This duality, human warmth on one side, ruthless calculation on the other, confounded both allies and adversaries. Friends would describe him as disarmingly polite, generous, and even philosophical, yet he could simultaneously plan moves that would ruin rivals or dismantle competing operations. To Lansky, the human mind was just another system to analyze, predict, and influence. Perhaps the most enduring mystery is his hidden fortune. At the time of his death in 1983, Lansky's official estate was modest compared to the empire he had built. Rumors abound: Swiss bank accounts, Caribbean investments, secret properties, and cash flows still hidden decades later. Some believe he distributed wealth among trusted associates to ensure its survival. Others suggest that the real fortune vanished entirely into offshore networks designed to be untraceable. Whatever the truth, this uncertainty contributes to the aura of Lansky as a man whose influence outlasted both his life and public understanding. Even decades after his death, Lansky's methods continue to inspire intrigue. Modern organized crime analysts study his techniques, recognizing that his combination of finance, psychology, and strategy set the template for generations. Where others relied on force, Lansky relied on calculation. Where others sought fame, he sought invisibility. His life demonstrates that true power often operates quietly, subtly, and invisibly, leaving only questions for those who come after. As we reflect on his life, a striking picture emerges. Meyer Lansky was a man of contradictions, a figure both feared and revered. He was loyal yet ruthless, discreet yet far-reaching, humble in appearance yet commanding in influence. He built an empire that spanned continents, survived revolutions, evaded law enforcement, and left behind a legacy of mystery that continues to captivate historians, journalists, and the public alike. In the end, Lansky's story is not simply one of crime. It is a story of intelligence, strategy, and the subtle exercise of power. It is the story of a man who understood that influence, secrecy, and foresight could achieve far more than violence ever could. The ghost of Meyer Lansky lingers in Havana's casinos, the streets of Miami, the ledgers of secret banks, and the imaginations of those who study the hidden structures of power. And perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of his life. The most formidable empires are often invisible. The most dangerous men operate in silence, and the true measure of power is the ability to shape the world without ever being seen. Meyer Lansky was that man, the accountant of empires, the strategist of shadows, the unseen hand that quietly moved billions, influenced governments, and outsmarted law enforcement. His story is a reminder that history is often written not by those who make headlines, but by those who operate in the shadows, quietly ensuring that the world unfolds exactly as they planned. Meyer Lansky died in 1983, but the questions remain. How much of his empire survives in secret? How deeply did his influence penetrate governments, economies, and organized crime networks? And perhaps the most compelling question of all, what else did the world never see because the man who controlled it moved entirely in the shadows? His life remains a blueprint for understanding power, meticulous, invisible, enduring, and profoundly mysterious. And in the quiet corridors of history, in the whispers of old gangsters, in the hidden ledgers of banks long forgotten, the ghost of Meyer Lansky continues to rule. And so, Meyer Lansky's life came to a quiet close in Miami in 1983. No headlines, no parades, no dramatic shootouts, just a man who had spent decades shaping the underworld and international finance from the shadows, disappearing as quietly as he had appeared. He had survived assassinations, revolutions, betrayals, and relentless law enforcement scrutiny. He had outsmarted enemies, navigated political upheavals, and built an empire that most only glimpsed in rumor. Yet the true legacy of Meyer Lansky is not in what can be measured, his wealth, his casinos, or his investments, but in what cannot be seen. The ghost of his influence lingers in Havana's deserted casinos, in the streets of Miami, and in the hidden corridors of finance where secrets still breathe. Millions, perhaps hundreds of millions, may remain undiscovered, hidden in accounts that bear no name, a testament to the genius of a man who understood that the most powerful empires are invisible. History remembers the loud, the violent, the flamboyant, But Lansky reminds us that true power often whispers. It moves quietly, subtly, and deliberately, shaping events, influencing people, and bending outcomes without leaving a trace. He was the mob's accountant, the strategist of shadows, the unseen hand guiding empires from behind the curtain. And maybe that is the greatest mystery of all. Even decades after his death, we are left to wonder, what did Meyer Lansky truly leave behind? How far did his influence reach? Which fortunes, which decisions, which events were quietly shaped by his mind? The answers may never come, but the man who survived history, who mastered silence, secrecy, and strategy, remains immortal, a legend whose shadow stretches across decades, a ghost whose story continues to fascinate, terrify, and inspire. Meyer Lansky did not need headlines. He did not need fame. He did not even need to be seen. He was and remains the ultimate architect of invisible power. And in that silence, in that shadow, he is still in control.